And we're really excited to have Amy Adrion join us. And to start, Amy, it would be great if you could just almost elevator pitch us just a quick little synopsis introduction of who you are, and then I'll launch into some of my questions before we open it up to everybody else who wants to talk with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks you guys for being here, and I'm curious to hear what you guys are, what you're doing, what your interests are. I take it you're all filmmakers. Yeah, I'm a writer, director, producer. I live in Los Angeles. I think my Twitter bio says I'm a filmmaker and a mom, and I'm trying my damnedest to be hopeful, which is fairly accurate. Yeah, I went to film school at UCLA. I worked a bunch of film jobs after graduating college. I was a production assistant in independent film. I worked for a small distribution company. I had a bunch of different jobs there, and I kind of always just had the nagging desire that I wanted to make films myself. And I was someone, for whatever reason, I just was someone who kind of didn't feel like I could just go out and make a movie. I felt like I needed some training, or I needed some special, tutorage or some tutelage. Someone had to give me the keys to do it. And, once you start making films, you realize that that's a little bit crazy, and we just all need to dive in and just make the films we want to make. But I went to film school at UCLA, so I got my master's in film directing at UCLA, and that was an incredible experience, largely because it was just a few years of life where you just focus on almost nothing else but what stories do you want to tell, how do you want to tell them, watching other people's films, helping your friends make their films, seeing what works, what doesn't, learning, how to record sound and, lighting and editing and all that kind of stuff. And so I went to film school at UCLA. I made a bunch of short films that did well. One of them won an award at the Directors Guild of America. But then kind of after graduating, I got married. I had 2 kids. That took up a big chunk of my time and focus and energy. And then when my kids were 3 and 5, I was just really antsy to make a feature film, which I hadn't made yet. And so that's when I started making Half the Picture, which is a documentary about women film directors and the challenges that they face in Hollywood. And kind of all the while I was home with my kids, I also had these freelance jobs. I would work at Sundance as a screener. I worked on Oscars, which is super fun doing in graduate school, as a red carpet producer, kind of just all these little random freelance things. But, getting to make Half the Picture and just deciding to make that independently was my first feature film. And that had a really beautiful road, and it was very independently made, DIY, do it yourself, with friends from grad school mostly.
Wow.
Who made the film, and it premiered at Sundance in 2018 and went on to screen at a bunch of festivals. It's on the Stars Network now, and that was great. And now I'm trying to get a few other doc and narrative projects going, while also teaching film and being a mom and doing all those kinds of things.
So doing many things always.
Yeah, as we all do. I mean, as we all do, right?
Yeah. So we're definitely going to jump into Half the Picture soon, but before because that's just been so incredible for our community and really resonated with a lot of people. But I would like to kind of take you back to, was there a moment when you really decided, a large part of my life wants to be committed to being a filmmaker? And was there any mental hurdle you had to overcome to committing yourself to that path?
Yeah, I don't know if I can quite say it was a decade of that hurdle, but it was and it's so funny. I feel like our culture is really interesting. No one ever at any point said, oh, you want to make films, or you want to be a director, or you're a girl, you can't do that. No one ever said anything as blatant as that, but I just, I loved films. I just assumed everybody else loved films. I still kind of assume everybody would be a director if they could be a director, because it's the best job in the world and it's so fun, and you get to tell your stories and you get to be in control of the music and who your collaborators are and what the story is and how you tell it. And, I think I spent a lot of my life thinking, well, that person is more creative than I am, and that person's a better writer than I am, and that person has a really good visual style, and that person, and kind of always, I don't know, spending a little bit too much time on what other people were doing and thinking well, who am I to to be the one to, you know, direct something. And then at a certain point you just go, you know, there's a million brilliant films in the world, and there's a million trillion zillion like okay films in the world, and there's a lot of really bad films in the world, and those people told their story and directed it and made it. And so, you know, I think there was a little bit of being like, okay, so my first film isn't going to be Casablanca, but why does that stop you from making? Everybody has to start somewhere. Everybody has, you know, a story to tell. And you know, I think it was when I was working at a small distribution company in New York City. Basically, I would go to film festivals and watch films and then come back and say, oh, I think you should acquire these films. And, you know, I just would see tons and tons of films, and some were great and a lot weren't. And at a certain point, and I loved working with the filmmakers, we'd buy their films and then release them in art house theaters around the country. But I just kept feeling like, okay, this is fun and I like collaborating with filmmakers, but like, I want to be them. I want to be in that role. And it was like a few years of feeling that. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm just going to apply to graduate school for film. That's what I want to do. I applied to one school, which was UCLA, because you didn't have to take your GRE, and I was too lazy to take my GRE. And it was really hard to get in. You know, it's like however many thousands of people apply, they accept 21 students. I was living in Brooklyn, and
wow,
fun but crappy apartment. And I was like, all right, if I get in, this is what I'm doing, and this is, you know, this is the change I'm going to make in my life. And if I don't get in, I'll figure out something else to change in New York. But I got in, and yeah, that was really formative. But it took, you know, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that it took as long as it took for me to actually listen to my own instincts that like, this is something I really, really want to do. And I can't put my finger on, you know, what all those messages were that were really subconscious, that were like dissuading me from doing that. So.
Yeah. Going a little further on that, can you kind of, you know, especially because I see that we have some of our youth filmmakers in this chat as well. How do you continue to address that even now that you have made some amazingly successful films and you have, you know, really channeled your passion in that direction? How do you continue to, you know, make sure, you know what, I am capable of doing this. I have a vision and my stories do have an audience. How do you always continue to work on that? Do you have a collaborative group that you go to in times where you're doubting, or how do you go internal and really reconnect with that trust and faith in yourself again?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And I think that's a surprising thing that is, you know, it's always part of the process. And in Making Half the Picture, I talked to women directors who are like hugely successful. Many of them have had decades of, you know, careers that have been decades long. And I think a lot of them still struggle with that. And it's not so much as it does what I have to say matter. I think maybe when you're younger, there's a little bit more of preoccupation with that or concern about that. But certainly at every point in your life, I think you have to choose to make an investment in yourself, in your own creative ideas. And that's a huge challenge, you know, and it's an investment of money, because filmmaking costs money. Even if you're making a small, low budget short film, it's still some money that you're investing. And even more important than that, it's just time and energy. And I think it takes a little bit of beautiful narcissism to make that happen. You have to say, I'm going to focus on myself, and I'm important, and my art is important, and my ideas are important. And so this time that I could be hanging out with my friends or my boyfriend or girlfriend, or, you know, volunteering for an organization that needs help, or helping my parents, or doing whatever, like I am going to carve out this time for myself. And that's constantly a struggle. And I think, you know, often as women, I don't, you know, want to generalize too much, but I think it can just be so easy to be reactive to the world around us and who needs what, and, you know, what do I need to respond to? It can be very difficult to be like, okay, I'm going to sit, and it's incredibly difficult for me, you know, how do I sit and just write this script that I care about, or tell people I'm not going to, you know, I'm not available now. I'm going to be, you know, focusing on something that I need to do. And that remains a huge challenge, but if we're ever going to make anything, it's necessary. You need that time and that commitment.
Yeah. I'm curious, before we kind of fast forward to some of the more recent projects you've completed and worked on, if you could tell us a little bit about a film when you were just starting out that was maybe a big learning lesson, or a film that you really felt like you learned a lot, either you had to face a lot of adversity and challenges, or it was just a huge growth experience for you back when you were starting.
A film that I made?
Yes.
Um, I would say, I think kind of the first film I ever really made at UCLA, we had like a short film exercise our first year. We had like a little 2-minute film that we made, and that was fine. And then we had kind of our 6-minute film was like our first year, like kind of the culminating project that you have in your first year. And I think that was a huge growth experience because, again, I think I tend to be like really focused on other people and their strengths, and I don't know. I think it was the fact that I finished my 6-minute film. I made a short called Surviving 7th Grade. It wound up playing at the Tribeca Film Festival and some other festivals. At UCLA, they have something called Spotlight Night, which is when like the best films of that year, like the students select a group of the best films, and then they bring in some, industry mucky mucks who vote on the final films that go into this Spotlight Night, which is basically like the best films that the students have that year. And my first year film was selected for that, which is like pretty unusual because usually people's thesis films are these films that are made with a lot more, money and just production value and all of that. But I think for me, it was like I can do this. I'm proud of what I made. And it was a very personal film about like a middle school experience. And I just made it exactly how I wanted it. And the music was what I wanted. And like, I loved my 2 actors. And, it was just like a joyful process for me to make it. And to see it connect with people was almost shocking, and really gave me a lot of confidence of being like, okay, yes, other people may be better writers, and they may be better cinematographers, they may be better at After Effects, they may know programs that I don't know, but like what I'm making is resonating with people. And so that I think was a huge, just gave me a huge boost of confidence.
Yeah, I feel like those moments too, especially a person in a creative field, and especially if you're a writer, having that moment where you see it connecting with an audience must be huge and really affirm the trust you've had in yourself to get to this point. Yeah, I can see that being a big aha moment.
Yeah, and it is kind of an out-of-body experience. I mean, it's terrifying. Like whenever even I screen films at film festivals, like I know there are some filmmakers who are like, I love festivals, I love playing my films with an audience. And I feel like I'm just like always like feeling every noise in the room. And I feel, it's like having your heart like open to the world in a very uncomfortable way. But yeah, I just remember it's so funny. I remember like when the students were like voting on films that they were going to pick for like that Spotlight Night. And I remember the filmmaker who made the film had to step out of the room, and then all the other students would be in the room, and you could kind of hear your film playing. It's all these things are super character building because you're like, how nightmarish of a scenario is that? And you hear if they're laughing or not or whatever. But I just remember like being out in the hallway and people like really laughing, and like just you could kind of feel a lot of positive energy. And it was the first time that I had ever had that experience of just being like, oh, all right, I can do this.
Yeah. Before I kind of start asking some questions about Half the Picture, I would like to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned how excited you get about being a director and how much it excites you to have that control and really get to see your visions come to life. Can you tell us a little bit about what you feel makes a good director and skills that you've worked on to come to the point of feeling confident and being in that director position?
Yeah. Well, I would say early on, even though I was saying I maybe in some ways didn't have confidence, it's kind of a dichotomy, because I feel like I did always have confidence inside in my vision. I was always like, I know what this is, and this is the story that I'm telling, and, you get notes and people go in the script, you could go here, and the edit, you could do that. And I was, it was very clear, like, no, that's not what it is. This is what it is. So in some ways I was very, I was very confident in my vision. I just wasn't confident about it being out in the world, I guess I would say.
Okay.
And I would say as a director, one thing that I'm continue to work on is, I do feel a lot of confidence in my storytelling, in my vision. It just, I think if you follow your instinct, it feels right. And so that's not something that I've had to work on really. It's more, how you present yourself in a world is a different, in the world, it's just a different kind of performance
Right.
that you have to have as a director. And I think, there are just certain ways of speaking where women, and I do this all the time, kind of, make less of our achievements, or, try to soft pedal our desires or what we want to do, because we're used to doing that our whole lives, right?
Right.
So
right.
I think that's been it continues to be a challenge for me, is like, how do you, I feel that confidence. I love the stuff that I make, but how do you share it with the world in a way that they perceive you as confident about your art as you really are? And that's been a little bit of a lesson. And, some career coaches will tell you, you never say whatever, all these little phrases that I feel like women often say that wind up, diluting the power of what you're trying to communicate. So there's stuff like that I've definitely had to work on, just, and it's more presentation of oneself. And that's an interesting part of the business too. It's not just making films. You have to, especially when you're an independent film and you're just starting out, you are your spokesperson for your film. You are, you have to be, you're on panels and you do interviews, and, you have to communicate who you are and what you care about in a way that is engaging for people. And that's has been a little bit of a lesson.
Yeah. I'm really interested to hear, since you have touched a couple times on kind of your, almost like your story instinct, or when this story is important, this is a good story. Can you tell us about how you honed that, or where you start finding stories, or what inspires you to chase these stories?
I don't know. I mean, it's what's important to each one of us, it's like we all have certain stories that we want to tell, or certain things that we connect to. And it just is what it is. I think, sometimes, especially when you're younger, it's more a matter of being like, wow, can people really make a film about that? Like that thing, that weird experience I had, or that thing that is meaningful to me that I've never seen in film before. And, like, I think we all kind of have just certain stories and things that are significant and meaningful for us, whether they're relationships or experiences or feelings. And I think it's just landing in those and making sure you make your work about that. I mean, I think certainly starting out, and you'll meet a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm writing a horror and a rom-com and a this because like this is what's hot, selling now.
Right.
And, I'm sure there are people like that who have that kind of like agile minds that they can like do all that stuff. But you're like, well, are you in there anywhere? Do you care about this? If you don't care about it, why am I going to care about it? And I think, you just have to find those kernels of things that you care about. And if that's in your work and that authenticity is in your work, people will respond to it. And I think, especially when you're starting out, there can be a temptation of being like, well, this thing is hot right now, so I need to write what the industry wants. And then I think you just wind up going down some rabbit hole of guessing what the universe wants. And then like, who wants to read that or see that? Nobody, really. It's like, you have to make something that means something to you. And also life's too short and making films is too hard. Like, and it's not to say it has to be a personal story, but it has to have, whether it's fantasy or horror or whatever, it has to like have something that is like drawing you into it. And, people will feed off that and feel it.
It's almost, I mean, you pointed it out, but it's yeah, having authenticity in your story, and also almost having a stake in it, because it will give you that, probably that drive to see it through and to really care about the story you're telling,
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And things, you can't orchestrate the kind of road your film is going to have. Your film could get into Sundance, it could get into Cannes, it could get into the Toronto Film Festival, or it could not get into anything. And, basically you've made it as an exercise in your own artistry, and that is what it is. So it's like, you can't make it for the end result. You have to make things that, if you're going to die tomorrow, you're like, I'm so glad I made this thing, because this shares what it feels like to be me, or some kind of experience that I want to share with the world. Making films is just too hard to have it be anything other than that.
And please, if people have comments or questions, I think we already had somebody comment about reading a book and really feeling inspired and hit by a chapter that they read in the book and wanting to see that play out on screen. Yeah, so it's like that personal stake, and now you've got the reader involved in it. So it's very similar to what you were saying. But yeah, please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat. But I would like to get to talking about Half the Picture, and kind of, you could tell us a little bit of the backstory to that, what led you to that story and what led you to start creating it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I went to film school at UCLA for directing. So that's what I wanted my, career path to be. And then after graduation, pretty soon after, I got married, and we had 2 children. And kind of during the time that I was working freelance jobs, but not working full time, and mostly being a parent full time, I very much kept reading up on what was going on in the industry, and just reading the New York Times and Variety and Hollywood Reporter and things like that. And, kind of how we were speaking before this officially started with you and Esther about the news. I mean, it felt like a daily, assault of all of the bad news for women directors. And, it would just be article after article about how older women directors couldn't get work, and then younger women directors couldn't get work, and then mid-career directors couldn't get work, and then TV directors couldn't get work, and Oscar directors couldn't get work, and you're just at a certain point, you're like, I this is killing me. This is what I went to school for. I'm in a lot of debt for this. I know a lot of talented women directors, people who I went to school with, and older than me, and what is going on? And so I feel like when I was home, I just kept I was just kind of taking all that in. A play date at my house with my 2 little ones and a friend of mine from Georgetown. I went to Georgetown for undergrad, and a friend of mine is an entertainment journalist, and she wrote a book about DreamWorks. She used to work for Variety, and we were just talking about the women director issue. And at that point, that's when the ACLU had gotten involved, so the American Civil Liberties Union, and they kind of took this on as an employment discrimination case, and they started doing research and interviewing all these women directors. And that was really just a big shift, that this incredibly established, well-resourced organization was saying, this is a problem and we're looking into it. So it seemed like, for the first time in a long time, that powerful forces were taking notice of this, and that maybe something was actually going to change. And so my friend Nicole and I were talking about that, and kind of at that play date, we were like, maybe we should make a documentary about this. This seems like, things are starting to change. And so we kind of talked about it back and forth, and we interviewed some women who are kind of activists on the front lines, just took them out for coffee, and they were very generous with their time. And then a few months down the road, my friend Nicole was working at that point, she was working for Fast Company full-time as a journalist, and she had 2 kids, and she was just like, I can't really, I can't really take this on at this point. And so at that point I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna make it, let's do it. My spouse was who I went to film school with, let's do it, and kind of bought a small camera package, and that investment had been made, and it was like, this is on, we're doing this. And at that point, there was there was money invested and we were just going to make it happen. So we just started with, you know, some women who either I knew, I had worked as Miranda July's assistant for a year when I was in graduate school. So I knew her and I'm a huge admirer of her as a writer and filmmaker. So I knew I could interview her. And my thesis advisor at UCLA, she's a very established editor and she cut all of Catherine Hardwicke's films, including Twilight and all these big films. And she put me in touch with Catherine, who has been talking about these issues forever from the beginning of her career. And so we just started out with those 2 interviews and it was like, all right, we're gonna do this. And it just kind of started there and then grew bit by bit. And we started out with no money. We didn't pay the crew at first. We just did equipment swaps. Like my camera people, I would, you know, if they worked on the film, I would give them our, you know, 4K cameras for other shoots they were doing. And that's like kind of how we got it started. And then eventually we got financing. But yeah, that's how it all started.
Oh my God. About how long from when you and your colleague had that conversation until completion did it take, that process take for you to see it through?
Yeah, I think we started talking about it in the summer of 2015, and then we started shooting in December of 2015, and then it premiered at Sundance in January 2018. So it was like 2.5, 3 years, which, you know, felt like a lifetime for me. But when the year we were at Sundance, there was this filmmaker who had been working on her film, this great filmmaker, Heather Lenz. She made this great doc called Kusama about the Japanese artist Kusama. And she had been working on that film for 17 years. So I was like, all right, I'm 3 years, 2.5, whatever. Like,
oh my gosh.
Drop in the bucket. Yeah, but it felt like a very long time.
Yeah. So you obviously had a lot of amazing people featured in this documentary that told a lot of riveting stories. What was that process like, talking, you know, at first connecting with and then getting them to agree to be a part of this project?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are amazing, and the film is what it is because they care about this issue and they took the time to do it, you know, and yeah, I just have so much admiration for them. I think the time that we were making the film is when, you know, people started speaking out even more publicly about these issues. I mean, for a very long time, there was an incredible taboo against, you know, women directors speaking out at all, to even acknowledge that that there were challenges in being women in the industry, because there was like the greatest 2 compliments that you could get as a woman director were, you know, she directs like a man and she's just one of the guys and you don't have to worry about her like all those other women, like she is just one of the guys, like, you know. And so it's like, I think for people to say like, oh no, that was kind of, you know, bullshit what you said or how you acted, like nobody wanted to even, you know, say that, because you just didn't want to be, you know, whatever, all those things, like you can't take a joke or difficult or not fun, or
you're almost like trying to take up as little space. It almost sounds like try to take up as little space while getting the job done.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we were reaching out to people at just the right time. And, you know, the women, like I said, who sat down with us were taking a chance. This was my first feature film. So, you know, it's not like I had won 3 Oscars and like they had to sit down with me. I mean, the reason that they met with me is, you know, they care about this issue. And I think from the earliest interviews we did, I mean, I came in really well prepared. I watched all the women's films. You know, we had a really respectful crew, almost all women, all the camera department were all women. Wow. And I think women who were interviewed had a good experience and then would kind of, you know, talk to their friends and even made recommendations to me, you know, like, oh, you should talk to,
That's amazing.
Lena Dunham or Leslie Glatter or, you know, Nisha Ganacha or whatever. So yeah, and the experience of sitting down with these women was kind of exactly what you might imagine, in that they were all totally different, because even though we're all women, we're all different human beings, but absolutely amazing. I mean, I am such a deep, genuine fan of all of the women in the film that I was a kid in the candy store just to be able to sit down and say like, okay, Gina Prince-Bythewood would talk about Love and Basketball, or talk about Transparent with Jill Soloway, or talk about
Wow.
Girls with Lena Dunham, or, Ava DuVernay's films. It was amazing. And they were various levels of chit-chatty and friendly, or reserved, or no nonsense, or hilarious, because we're all different. But every single one of the interviews was, dreamy for me, as someone who loves films and loves their films in particular.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on it, but I wanted to ask you to maybe explain a little bit further. You obviously were filming this during some pretty, like you said, a lot of things shifted in those years that you were filming. It seems like people were becoming more outspoken. The news was coming around to covering it a lot more. You had Me Too and Time's Up and presidential elections. Did you see that change the story at all, or did it affect the way you were going about telling the story at all?
Yes and no, mostly no. We had an edit of the film that we submitted to Sundance. I want to say I know these dates exactly. We submitted to Sundance like on October 6th, 2017. And I think it was October 19th or something like that all the Harvey Weinstein stuff happened. So it was like literally 2 weeks later when all of that started happening. And I always knew that we wanted part of the film to have the sexual harassment and those kinds of challenges that women face in the film business as part of the story. But once all of those stories started coming out, and it was an absolute avalanche of, it was like Jeffrey Tambor and Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer and Charlie Rose. And I mean, I felt like every week it was like an icon of the entertainment world was falling, rightfully so. So I think there was a little bit of pressure at that time to have the film be more about that, just because that's what was in the world. But I always knew that, like, again, like there are now, and there will continue to be, films about those guys and what they did and how gross it was and how they were total assholes and like how the system worked and all of that. And I'm going to be curious to see those films, but that's not what our film was.
Right.
And our film is about the women telling their own stories, and they are the center of the story. And it's just so easy. Once you let too many of those stories get into the film, all of the air is sucked out, and it becomes a film about these crappy guys. And you're like, the whole point of this film is women being centered, a largely women, female crew, giving space to these women who inspired us to talk about the good and the bad and the ugly. And in the ugly are some of these stories, but we wanted to be really careful that that doesn't overtake the film and their accomplishments and their artistry and their perseverance and all that kind of stuff. So definitely we had moments of being like, should it be more or less of this or that? But it ultimately didn't change the film from what it had been.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably could, with the obvious both political and cultural hype, it could have easily almost overnight changed your film. So it sounds like you really had to have those conversations and address like what was our mission from the start. And if changing it, I mean, you could have easily just changed that and almost changed the entire narrative, like you said.
Yeah. Well, it is funny, and I'll just say, I mean, in the very beginning of the film, there's like a montage of just kind of success of like these women's successes. It's like, Twilight and this and that, and Ava being the first African-American woman nominated for a Golden Globe, and just kind of like a quick montage of like the highlights of some of the women who were in the film. Mm-hmm. And in the cut that we submitted to Sundance, we literally had, it was Karin Kusama being interviewed by Charlie Rose. It was Matt Lauer talking about like statistics about women directors. Mm-hmm. It was Jeffrey Tambor talking about what a genius Jill Soloway was. It was someone talking about Harvey Weinstein, not in a bad way, but just in, wow. And you're like, it was literally in the first 2 minutes of the film, and we cut them all out because I was like, I just can't even start this film with all these names. But it was just uncanny that it was literally all of them in the first 2 minutes. But it just goes to show you, like, that so many powerful people have, been part of this system in determining who gets attention, who gets opportunities, and these are the ways that they've been treating women. So in our particular case, we just recut the whole beginning of that. We didn't change the meat of it, the content of it, but we just didn't want like their faces to be in the beginning of the film.
I see we have a question, so I'm going to go to the chat and go ahead and read that to you. And then please, everybody, as we kind of carry on this chat for about like 10, 15 more minutes, go ahead and type in whatever questions you have, or if you want to speak it out loud on video, you can, I think you can unmute yourself, or if not, just type it in the message and one of us can unmute you as well. But I see someone ask advice on structure. How many interviews in a doc is too much? 10 to 12 minutes, is that too short, or is that about right? And then there's a second part, but I'll let you start there.
Yeah. Well, I would say content, like what your story is going to determine the length of your film, and also like what your resources are and what you want to make. I wanted to make this film for me as my first feature film. I was like desperate to make a feature film. So it wasn't like, well, I'll shoot and see if it's a feature or a short. I wanted to make a feature length film, so I went into it knowing that. But you may have the resources and the intention to be like, all right, I want to make a 10-minute short film because that's what I can do now. And I think the amount of interviews, you know, you'll just kind of figure it out as you go along, depending on what your subject is. If you interview 3 people and you have 3 great interviews, you could have a 60-minute long film there, or you could have a 5-minute long film, depending on like how good the stuff is in there and the story that you want to tell. So I think that's really hard to, I mean, in our film, I think let me think about this. I think we had about 50 interviews in our film. I think it was about 30 directors and 20 experts, or maybe 15 experts or something like that. But it's really actually not about how many interviews you have. It's like, do you have enough people telling the parts of the story that you want to tell? And if you haven't quite gotten that yet, then maybe you pick someone else to interview to help fill in that part of the story. But I wouldn't really focus on the number of interviews. It's like, what are the points that you're trying to touch on? And you could get it all in one interview and have some B-roll and have a great 10-minute film. So I think it's just always keeping your like focus on the story. Do I have the story I want to tell yet? And if not, you may need to shoot more. But I wouldn't stress about the number of interviews.
And the second part to that question was, how do you decide whether to make a short or longer doc? Do you ever start short and then you see it turning into a longer documentary?
That has not happened to me. And I think usually it's what you want to make. I mean, I feel like, again, you're not going to make a doc about the history of the world and have it be like a 5-minute long thing unless you want like a certain kind of approach to it. I think you have to kind of usually determine what the length is before you go into it, and just assume, okay, I think I'm making a 5 to 10 minute long doc, and then maybe you get amazing stuff and you change it and you make a little bit longer. But you usually go into it knowing what you want to make. And also, you always want to think about, before you make anything, where is this film going to live? Who is going to see it? And how are they going to see it? There's a lot of different homes for a short doc. You can play at a ton of festivals with like a really strong short doc. Or are you trying to sell it to TV and it's maybe an hour-long thing? Or are you trying to make a feature film? But I would definitely suggest, don't go out and just start shooting and being like, it could be a short, or it could be a this, or it could be a that. You'll change it if you need to change as you go along, but kind of have your audience ready of like, I'm going to try to make a 10-minute doc to submit to festivals, and that's my goal. Or, and I would say if you're starting out, like start with shorts and make a bunch of great short docs and then build to something longer. Cause it just takes more resources. It takes more time to make a feature than it does to make a 5-minute film.
Awesome. So keep the questions coming. I see them coming in. So this is great. On average, how long did you interview each director and have the picture?
An hour to an hour and a half, usually about an hour.
Was there a metric to that, or was there a reason, or was that kind of the length you decided you needed to kind of get the meat of what you wanted?
Yeah, and these are really busy people and you want to be respectful of their time. I mean, some of the interviews, like I think there's one of the activists we talked to for like 2.5 or 3 hours because she just had so much that she wanted to tell us. But a lot of these women, especially the working directors, like they've got other interviews for projects, they have scripts they're working on, they have, they're busy people. So I think you want to roll in, tell them it's about an hour and try to be respectful of that. And that's usually about the amount of time people will give you. And then, sometimes it goes to an hour and a half, but don't expect that.
Awesome. And then this one is about, do you have any tips on acquiring financing for a feature film when you are starting out, or a quote, nobody, so to speak? What a little bit down the financing route as an independent filmmaker that maybe doesn't have strong name recognition.
Yeah. I mean, that's the question. That is the question with all of filmmaking is money, 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 money. It's not, like you want to work on your story and your character and your structure and all that, but like we're all trying to figure out how you can actually make your stuff. I would suggest, as so many of the women in our film suggest, and so many great male directors like, Mark Duplass and Taika Waititi, and you really want to make something with the resources that you have and just try to make at least part of it. I mean, I think we all have these fantasies of, well, I have this script and it's like a $5 million script, or it's a $20 million script, or it's whatever. How can I get that? Answer, you're not going to. Like, no one is ever going to give you that money as a nobody, no matter how good your script is. So you need to figure out, if you have an amazing, fantasy film, figure out with your friends, can I shoot 3 minutes of something that's in the world, or one scene from it? How can I use the resources that I have at my disposal right now, the friends, the locations, a friend I know who can do some VFX, like how can I use what I have now to make something? Certainly there are like script contests and things like that where you can get attention for your scripts. Austin Film Festival has a great one. The Nickel Fellowship is through the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. If you wind up winning some of those screenplay awards, you'll get attention for your script, and that's a way you can, potentially get some, financing or attract people who would want to help make it. That is, I'm not going to say impossible. It's almost impossible to like win those things. And usually people submit with script after script after script. So I would just say, keep writing that script. Don't be discouraged by that. But I think all of us, and this is advice that I say, and I'm giving to myself also, we all need to not be too distracted by that pie in the sky. Like someday someone is going to give me this amount of money to make this bigger, amazing thing that I want to make, and just look at what you can make with what you have right now. And keep your dream script, but not ever going to help you make that until you've shown what you can do. And you have to do that by making smaller things that connect with people. So yeah, but money's the hardest, and money for women is hard, and asking for money is hard, and getting it is harder. And so it's like, it just is what it is. You just have to know that and keep writing, but figure out a way to take a little bit of that and make something that shows, what you can do. And there's power in that, you're not begging, you're not asking, you're creating. So yeah, it's a tough answer, but I'm in the same position as are many other doc and feature directors who've done more work than I am. They all, Catherine Hardwick, she has her dream scripts that she can't get financed, and, is hustling in the system, and she's made major movies. It just is what it is. So, I think we all need to focus on what we can do, like right now with the resources we have right now.
One of the last questions we have before we start wrapping up. So if you have a last question, go ahead and send it in before we let Amy go, who's given us so much of your time, which has been so great. But we have a question here that says, what made you want to be a director specifically? And did you consider pursuing any other roles in filmmaking?
Yeah. I think initially I didn't really know what a director was. So, but when you learn about, it's like as the director, you just, and it's not true in TV, which is a different kind of beast, but it's like you are the, it's your vision. And you know, I produce my own stuff because I have to. And that's, you know, as far as like doing payroll and doing taxes and, you know, raising money and dealing with accounting. Like I do all of that for my own projects because I have to. I don't love doing any of that, but I do produce. But the director part is the fun part, you know. Is it warm colors or is it cool colors? Is it, you know, is it wide lenses or is it like, you know, long lenses? Is it, who do you work with? Is it this cinematographer or that cinematographer? What does the music sound like? Like that's heaven. Who wouldn't want to, you know, and if you're lucky, you're choosing between a lot of talented people, and being like, I want to work with this person who's amazing. Have you heard their music? I get to work with them, or this cinematographer or this editor. You know, it's just the best. Being a director is the most fun job in the world. You know, I feel like I'm in the same boat as a lot of, you know, people who are emerging, in that it's just like, how do we create more opportunities for ourselves to do that more often? And it does mean making films with less, but being creative. And that's how you can start build a name for yourself, and you can start to strengthen your, you know, directing muscles. The more you do it, the better you get at it, even if it's low budget, even if it's with your friends, even if it's, you know, all of those things. But so fun. It's so fun.
Something I should probably try. I'm like, wow, this sounds great.
You should. I mean, we all have a story to tell, and just being like, I want to work with this writer, and I'm going to work with this. I'm going to bring all these talented people together. And I mean, it's heaven. It's so fun.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, Amy, before we wrap it up, where can we either keep up with your work or see some of your work before we kind of end this really great talk? Thank you so much for your time. I mean, this 51 minutes just flew by. It was such a riveting conversation. But where can people keep up with some of the projects you might be working on or see some of your stuff?
Yeah, well, we're active on social media. So Half the Picture is on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And we really try to make that like an online social media space that certainly keeps you updated with anything that has to do with Half the Picture. But I would say like most of the stuff we post is just shouting out other women and organizations doing cool things, because as we were talking about earlier, I think we all need a little like these shots of just encouragement in the world that we're living in now. So yeah, you can follow Half the Picture on any social media, and you'll, you know, find out about other women directors who you may know about, who you may not know about, who are doing amazing, incredible things. And then our film Half the Picture is on iTunes. It's on, you know, Amazon. It's wherever. And I would say if people haven't seen the film, it is, you know, even though it's about the challenges women directors face, I find it really inspiring because the women in the film are just such inspiring badasses. And I couldn't make a film that ended as a downer, because I just can't handle that in life. And the women in the film don't either. I mean, we're all not just persevering, but really, you know, hustling and thriving. So that's a lot of the energy of the film. So if you haven't seen it, you can see it on iTunes or wherever.